We're delighted that our keynote speaker this afternoon, who will be in conversation with Brian Finnegan, will also be able to, spend some time with you in terms of their conversation and then have a dialogue with you thereafter. For marriage equality, at the moment, I suppose we are planning what our activity for the next 2 to 3 years will be. We have had a really interesting session with the board, with Evan, over the weekend. We're in the middle of a strategic planning process right now, and for us, our determination and the sense of momentum around marriage equality in Ireland is greater than it has ever been. And I say that in the context of concerns that people may have had around the introduction of the passing of the recent Civil Partnership Act. However, I do believe, and from the conversations we've had within the legal community and indeed within the gay and lesbian community, and indeed as the opinion polls are showing as recently as September, the inexorable move and the definite destination of the ability for same-sex couples to be married in Ireland is happening. It really is now a question of how do we get from where we are to that point, and how long is that going to take us. So we're continuing with our various strategies of mobilisation, communication, and in particular our work with TDs and senators. And in these times of uncertainty, not knowing whether we will have a government or the shape of that government in the coming weeks, that makes that work even a little uncertain. So it's very useful to have Evan here today, and I think, as many of you will know, we're looking forward to a number of milestone dates. Catherine and Louise, who I see are here today, are expecting their case to be heard, at least to have a date for that case by February of next year. So there's a lot of things going on that we need to, I suppose, have a look and see how are we going to move forward together to achieve our common goal. So that's all I'll say for the moment. I'd like to welcome Alva Smith to say a few words from the NLGF, and I wish you a good afternoon.
Just to add my very warm words of welcome to Evan in Dublin, and to all of you for coming along at lunchtime today, and to say that in the NLGF we're really very pleased indeed to be continuing our long relationship with marriage equality, and indeed to see the representatives of so many organisations here today in our community with whom we also work and have worked over very many years. And I think the word I want to say here is that I think in these times of trouble and turmoil, that it is very good that we do have a community that has such strong links, connections and relationships, and that it really will be up to all of us over the coming months and over the coming difficult times in this country for us really to continue to work in solidarity for our aims, including obviously marriage equality and all of the other issues that are so important to lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people in this country, and also to keep reaching out to others in this country who are vulnerable and marginalised. And I do find it very inspiring to see that we strengthen our international relationships, our transnational relationships through occasions like today. So I would now like to turn to welcome Brian Finnegan, and to introduce Brian, who really doesn't need to be introduced to anybody, as our wonderful editor of GCN, who'd be in conversation with Evan Wolfson. Very welcome.
Thank you. Should I go up now?
Hi everybody, I'm mic'd up I think, so I'll stand over there. Back in 1983, while about 10 years before decriminalisation of homosexuality in this country, 26-year-old Evan Wolfson was advocating for equal marriage for lesbian and gay couples. Since then, he's been involved in several landmark cases, including the one that defined the notion of civil unions for the first time ever, and that was in Vermont in 1999. In 2003, Evan launched Freedom to Marry, an organisation that campaigns for marriage equality across America. Since then, he's been named by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. And in the wake of the introduction of civil partnerships legislation in Ireland, he's been invited here to talk to us about the way forward in the future for the march towards equality in this country. I'd like to welcome Evan Wolfson. So Evan, we'll start with a little bit about your background and how you came to...
Now that you sneakily wove my age into the introduction.
Well, had to be done. So when you were 26, how did you come to the marriage equality campaign? How did you become interested? And I suppose you were very forward-thinking at that time. We were all fighting for kind of much more basic human rights at that time.
Right. Well, I really always believe that you can't say you're for equality, you can't say you're for inclusion, and then acquiesce in exclusion from the central social and legal institution of virtually every society, including ours. Marriage is a legal institution. Marriage is a personal commitment. Marriage is a vocabulary. Marriage is a religious and spiritual, diverse set of ceremonies that vary from faith to faith and place to place and century to century. It has so much meaning, it has so much consequence, and it is so personal as well as political that to simply allow a group of people to be denied it means that that group is not equal, is not free, is not protected, and is not able to participate fully in the society. And acting on that belief in 1983, when I was in my last year of law school, I wrote essentially a dissertation on gay people's freedom to marry and why we should have it and why the culture was moving for it and how the law required it. And the rest is
history. And so you've been dedicated to it ever since, it seems. And so tell me about Freedom to Marry and how it works as an organisation, working with all different organisations across the United States.
That's right. Freedom to Marry is the national campaign to end the denial of marriage. And as you just said, we work very closely with all the organizations, gay or non-gay, national, state or local, religious or secular, and people who are not part of organizations but who come into this cause awakened by the call to justice. We work with anyone who wants to work on this one goal of ending the denial of marriage. And of course, the United States and Ireland have much in common. There are also some differences. One important difference is that in the United States, which is a federal system with 50 different states and a few other jurisdictions like the District of Columbia, marriage is in the first instance governed by the states. You get a marriage license not from Washington, D.C., but from New York or Utah or California. And so the discrimination, the denial, occurs at the first instance at the state level. So the whole idea was to create a mechanism that would enable all of us, legal organizations, lobbying organizations, religious advocacy and clergy, child welfare experts, and individuals having the crucial personal conversations that awaken and move the people in our own immediate circles, to enable all of us to be part of what needed to be a multi-year, multi-state, multi-partner, and multi-methodological, to use Martin Luther King's phrase, the methodologies of social change, to bring them all together in a combined whole with an eye on the prize of ending the denial of marriage, so that each group could do its part, but that they were doing them together in a way that kept the eye on the prize and not at cross purposes.
And of course, each group do their part in very different ways, and conflict can arise, as you know.
No.
How does freedom, how does it work as an organisation to kind of level off that kind of conflict?
Right. Well, first of all, we created Freedom to Marry specifically with the notion that it wasn't about displacing or duplicating what anyone else was doing. So in the United States, we have some really excellent legal rights groups, for example. And I used to work at one of them before founding Freedom to Marry. I worked for 12 years full-time and several years pro bono before that with a group called Lambda Legal. While I was at Lambda Legal, I did the case, the Hawaii case. I was co-counsel in the case that really launched this whole international discussion. And we had the first ever trial in human history in a courtroom in Hawaii. I set a state record for the longest time in Hawaii without going to the beach. And we presented evidence and allowed the government to come forward with whatever evidence they could call to justify this denial. And that case exposed the fact that there is no good reason for perpetuating this exclusion. There is no logic behind the assertions that are casually made about children or about interference with tradition and so on and so forth. That took place in this courtroom in Hawaii. We won the case legally. We won the freedom to marry. A judge ruled in favor of marriage, only to see it snatched away by political forces in an attack that was replicated again 10 years later, as many people probably saw, in California. So the lesson of that was just doing a good case is not enough. You have to make sure that the case, well argued, well presented, is matched with the same vigor in the court of public opinion as is made in the court of law. And so that was done while I was at Lambda Legal, one of the organizations. Lambda continues to do really good legal work. It won the case in Iowa, for example, that ended the exclusion of marriage. There are other legal organizations in our big country that have done some of the other important cases in Massachusetts and California and so on. But to just have the lawyers doing their part wasn't going to be enough. We needed public education, we needed political organizing, we needed to arm ourselves against the attacks that would come from political forces through the political process. And so Freedom to Marry was created in order to say, we don't have to have another law group. What we need is a group that can help make sure that all these other pieces rise up together and can work with the groups that are specialized in lobbying, that can work with the groups that are specialized in law, that can work with people who aren't part of any group but want the tools, the language, the talking point, the stories, the cases, that can work with the media, and to enable that to happen. And part of the way that Freedom to Marry is able to work effectively is because all these different organizations understand that we're only about one thing. It's this particular job. They exist to do many things. They have to serve as institutions on behalf of all the things we all care about, because obviously marriage is not the only battle line, it's not the only question that matters, and they're going to have to continue serving this community and the society long after Freedom to Marry, which is really more of a campaign than an organization, goes out of business. So because we understand that role, it's easier for people to cooperate because, on the one hand, they see that we're not trying to institutionalize or duplicate what they're doing. Yeah. And also, Freedom to Marry works very hard to raise money and share it with the other partners, to create tools and offer them to others. Anybody who wants to use the kinds of stories, the kinds of language, the kinds of tools, the web presence that we're working to create is welcome to do it, and frankly, they can plagiarize it. I mean, the whole point is to get it out there. So having the support of funders and contributors and partners who understand that and are willing to generously enable us to play that generous role with others has helped move things forward. Okay. And then we still have disagreements and argue.
Of course. One of the tenets of Freedom to Marry is that you don't allocate the use of the terms gay marriage or same-sex marriage. Can you tell me why, or tell our audience why?
Sure, because we're not fighting, I believe, for gay marriage. We're not asking for something different or other or lesser. We're saying that there's a very important legal institution. It's called marriage. The government issues marriage licenses. And what we're seeking is an end to the exclusion from that institution, from the end to the denial of those licenses that lacks any good reason. So we're saying that all people in America or in Ireland are equal, and couples who have made a commitment in life deserve the equal commitment under the law, and that commitment is called marriage. We're not trying to get the creation of some separate other lesser thing. Now, what often happens, and it's happened here in Ireland, and it has happened in many of the frontline battles we've had in the United States as well, is that some people find it hard to get there all the way, and they find it easier to get there in steps. And one of the steps that we've seen occur and that has been created on both sides of the Atlantic now is what I think of as this placeholder set of legal mechanisms. In the United States, we've called it sometimes civil union, sometimes partnership. Here in Ireland, you have something called, that you're working on, you've enacted, you now have to take effect, called civil partnership, which I think we can all agree, as legal mechanisms addressing particular legal problems, provide a set of protections and responsibilities that are certainly better than having none. And that's a good thing. It's an important step forward. And even more profoundly, perhaps, thanks to the great work you've done here and the similar kind of work we've worked on there, it's an acknowledgement by society and by the government that our families exist and that they have the same vulnerabilities, the same needs as other families. And the law begins to take acknowledgement of that and to move to address them. But at the same time, civil partnership or civil union, or partnership as we have it in the United States, is deliberately intended to both give and withhold. Mm-hmm. It gives something very important, and that's a good thing, including that acknowledgement upon which we can build. But at the same time, it's withholding the full protection, the full dignity, the full equality. And there's no good reason for a government in a free society such as ours to do that.
So in this country, in the lead up to civil partnership legislation, there was a deep division between two groups. One group that said it's a step in the right direction, the other group who said it's legislating for inequality. I wonder what your thoughts would be on bringing those two groups together towards a common objective.
Right. Well, I think the great news here is, thanks to your great work, despite the inevitable disagreements and divisions, you now all have achieved something very important. You have won civil partnership. What difference does it make who thought it was a good idea or a bad idea last year, when now the reality that we have shaping the context in which we move forward to finish the job is that we have this foundation. We can all come together. We can celebrate the fact that the government has made this acknowledgement of our families. It's now embedded in the law. That is a clear refutation of virtually all of the anti-gay stereotypes and arguments that were made previously. The Irish government has now put its weight in acknowledging these families, their needs, their entitlement. At the same time, the Irish government has failed to fully respect and fully protect those families. To do so would be to end the denial of marriage itself. Ending the denial of marriage will help families while hurting no one, and there's no good reason not to do it, and there's no good reason we can't all agree to stand on this foundation and build to finish the job.
The main, I suppose, non-inclusion in civil partnership in Ireland is the right to be a parent and the right for your children to recognise one of your parents as their full parent. And in the media, that's been a very divisive method of fighting against equality for gay and lesbian couples. How do you think, what is the best way to tackle that kind of divisive media rhetoric?
Right. Well, I would actually take a step back and say that that's not the main way in which civil partnership, although good, falls short. The main way in which it falls short is it deprives gay people, our loved ones, our families, non-gay people who care about equality, inclusion, and respect, of the common vocabulary that is a given, that is understood, that doesn't require a lawyer, a set of documents, or a dictionary when you're trying to explain who this person you're building a life with together is to you. To be denied the freedom to marry is to be denied that vocabulary, which brings with it the full inclusion and automatic clarity, security, and respect that people are entitled to. And people should not have to, when they enter the airport in Ireland, or head over to Europe, or go over to the United States, or go from New York to New Jersey, have to have a marriage visa stamped in their passport in order to show who they are in relationship to their family members. They should be able to say, this is my wife, this is my husband, and have those doors open. That clarity, that security, that understood inclusion and respect are at the heart of why the freedom to marry matters, and it's what we and you are still denied. In addition to that intangible but very important denial is the kind of denial you just talked about, which is the tangible ways in which civil partnership or civil union or partnership in the United States, though providing important protections, fails to provide the full measure of protection and clarity. And one of the main areas, as you just described here in Ireland, though I would hardly say I'm an expert in Irish law, but one of the main areas is the denial of any set of protections that are so important with regard to people raising kids. And the way to tackle that is to tell stories and to talk about the realities, the core reality of which is many gay families here in Ireland have children. Many gay parents are raising children. It's unrefuted now on the basis of solid evidence that we have marshaled in court, that you have marshaled in court, that we can put before our governmental bodies. In the United States, every leading expert on child welfare, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the National Association of Social Workers, the National Education Association. I could go through the entire list, and it's important that we do that. Every single one has called for ending exclusion from marriage on the basis of the best interests of the children, that children would benefit from being included in the legal structure and in the intangible dignity that come with marriage. And you have to make that case here, and the way to make that case here is to marshal all that evidence, but also to put in names and faces and stories out front, that these are Irish families, these are Irish children who are being harmed because the government is failing to protect them. It doesn't change anything in terms of those kids' reality. For if people who think that gay parents are not the best parents, those kids are still going to have the parents they're going to have. It doesn't change anything to shove those families outside of marriage. All it does is make life harder for those kids. And that's the story you have to tell here. And you need to connect that case to ending the denial of marriage rather than try to separate them, because the opposition doesn't separate them. They will slide back and forth between the two in a way that is intended to deny both the well-being of children and their best interests and the freedom to marry. It's our job to explain how, in fact, one of the reasons to finish the job is to protect the kids.
Okay. You spent the weekend here and you've met several members of organisations who are fighting for equality. Now that you've spent a few days here and talked to those people, how do you think, what are the main differences, do you think, the way we can campaign in the US?
I think the first thing I would say is that I'm a great admirer of the organizations here, and I've talked with people from Marriage Equality, I've talked with people from Glenn, I've talked with people from LGBT Noise, I've talked with just individuals who contacted me, both in the context of this visit, but even over the years before, and I've talked with some of the key funders that have supported the work here. And I think the work you all have done, however fractious it may feel being here, is terrific. I mean, you have transformed the conversation here in Ireland. You have solidified majority and almost super majority support. You have attained an important set of legal advances, while incomplete, that laid this foundation for moving forward. And whatever the differences along the way that are inevitable, as they are when families get together, let alone organizations. So that's my overriding reaction. I think that what I've seen in the last few days and heard in the conversations has been that people are still grappling with, I would say, almost two sets of questions. And again, I'm not an expert in Irish law, but one is there's been put forward this, what I think of as an unsubstantiated claim that in order to end the exclusion from marriage, there will have to be a referendum. And as an outsider, not an expert, looking at the Constitution, looking at some of the minimal analyses I've seen, and I have to say they're pretty minimal, I don't understand why that should be the case. And it seems to me the organizations that I've talked to now are going to start thinking through, or maybe they've already been thinking through, but they're going to start figuring out how to work together concertedly to shift that barrier that maybe you don't even need to have, and put the work back squarely into the political process to finish this job that they've begun with the civil partnership. And I guess the other area in which I've seen people wrestling is we've just come through this fight. People are fond of talking about how the tensions, I guess maybe because it's so at odds with the general friendly way in which people seem to be here, which is what I've experienced since I've been here. And how do we now move forward? And I, again, as an outsider, unencumbered by any of the scars that you've had here, though I have my 20 whatever years worth of my own, I look at it and I think whatever you felt before, whatever the disagreements there may have been before, you now have this foundation. The pathway forward is pretty clear. You need to redouble the great work you've already been doing to take that majority of public opinion that supports the freedom to marry, not just partnership, marriage. You have that majority thanks to your great work. The way you got it was by talking about it, by claiming the word, by claiming the vocabulary, by telling stories, by putting faces on it, by talking about kids, by talking about vulnerabilities, by talking about needs. And so it seems to me the opportunity now is for the groups to come together on a true campaign plan to get that public education work done, to do that visibility, to encourage people like everyone here in this room to do their own personal responsibility of having those conversations with their own circles of people, because each one of us is the most effective ambassador to the people in our lives, our family, our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers, to have the language, the tools, the vocabulary to make that case to people, while now beginning to engage the political parties and say, frankly, this is on your plate. You should do this work. Unless and until a direct, clear legal barrier is put forward in the form of a court statement that it has to be a referendum, I don't think the politicians should be taken off the hook. And I think my sense is organizations here are now beginning to think that through and figure out, do we have an opening here and can we move forward? And the good news is, if you move forward in a strong, concerted way, making this case with that assumption, the assumption that it can be done by the political forces in the same way that they took the step of civil partnership. Even if it turns out there has to be a referendum, you've gotten the leg up and laid the foundation for the public education that will lead to a vote that will be the right vote.
Okay. And in America at the moment, in the United States, what do you think are the main challenges facing I suppose, the movement towards equality of marriage?
Right. Well, we've had many of, obviously, the same challenges and struggles you've had, but we have not made as much progress as really now you have. We have, just this year in the United States, for the first time, achieved the important milestone of having a majority of the American people now support the freedom to marry, according to 2 separate nationwide polls a few months ago. That's a tremendous shift in the United States from where we were when I started the work, for example, in Hawaii, where we only had about 26%. So we've literally doubled the support across the country, nationwide. And of course, much of that progress has come during what was, until God knows what's coming next, the worst administration we've ever had when it came to respect for gay people and general civil liberties in the United States. We made all that progress, really, or almost all that progress, during that time. We've seen leading American figures as diverse as Bill Clinton, who signed into law the anti-marriage law, the so-called Defense of Marriage Act in 1996, now come out in support of undoing that law and embracing the freedom to marry, joined by people like Laura Bush and Cindy McCain, the wife of the opponent that Obama defeated in the last election. We've seen President Obama begin signaling now his journey to the right position in an interview he gave a couple weeks ago. We've seen other figures that I hesitate to claim, except they're on our side now, so we want them, that are Republican, conservative, right-wing figures, like Ted Olson, who was George W. Bush's chief lawyer, and Ken Mellman, who was the head of the Republican Party when they orchestrated the anti-gay wave of attacks in 2004, now coming out in support of the freedom to marry, joined by Glenn Beck, who, if you follow American media, you will know why I don't want to have him, except that now he's on my side, so okay. So there's been tremendous shift and progress in the United States, plus we have gone from 0 states in support of the freedom to marry, or with marriage, to now 5 US states, plus the District of Columbia, our nation's capital, several other states that have moved in place to go the next step with civil union partnership and our equivalent there. And all of that has, again, happened in the course of a decade. That, for the United States, is very, very fast historical progress. On the other hand, we have 45 states to go. We have now 52% of the public in support, but we have to solidify and diversify and grow that majority to create the climate to encourage the politicians to do their job and to enable the courts to rule the right way, because we all know that courts also, at least in the United States, respond to the sense of momentum, the sense of rightness, the sense of history, and the actual accomplishments on the ground. So we need to rack up more wins in more states and in more public opinion to create that climate that will enable the various political actors, including ultimately Congress or the Supreme Court, to finish the job.
Okay. Do you think, in Ireland over the last, anyone here will know that in the lead up to civil partnership, gays were in the media all the time talking about marriage. It was a constant, a constant presence. And I wonder what you think about the worry around exhaustion of that message, and whether you can pick up from, let's say we get civil partnership and they're out and they're going, well, here they are again, and they want more. What do you think? How can you kind of balance that out and keep people interested?
Well, that's one reason why it's good that you, despite what may have felt like disagreements, were actually working together pretty well to achieve an important goal, while at the same time never saying it was good enough, never saying that all we're asking for is civil partnership. Because I think that the gestalt of all the activism and energy and conversation, whatever the internal feelings of tension there may have been, was to engage TDs and the general public on the case for marriage, which led to the step of civil partnership, and at the same time be saying that, yes, we'll take, but it's not enough. So I don't think anybody can say, well, why are you back so soon? You've always said all along, what we want is full respect, equality, and protection, and that's called marriage. And at the same time, I think you also have the opportunity to build on this storytelling and engagement that you've done so well to create that majority and support, and now have to turn into political reality. You have an opportunity to do that in a way that is mindful of the climate and times in which we all live. And so one of the things I think you might want to explore is really talking about some of the economic vulnerabilities and inadequacies that families here still have, even under the civil partnership law, to be in tune with people's understanding that, particularly in a time of economic challenge, it's all the more important that government be on the side of people trying to care for their loved ones, instead of putting barriers in their place, including the barrier of an unequal and incomplete set of protections.
Okay. You talked earlier about the groups coming together and working towards a understanding around our constitution and whether there would be a referendum needed or not. If it came to a point where it was decided that there'd be a referendum, we would then be pitched into, the kind of dirty fighting that comes out around referenda in this country, where I'd be cycling to work and on a lamppost would be messages of hate about gay people, and in California the fight around Prop 8 did bring a lot of that religious-based hatred out into the open, and and the case was lost there. People lost, was won there, and people lost the right to have their marriages. What do you think about fighting that? How do you fight that overwhelming hate?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is that people should not have to have their fundamental rights and equality put up to a vote. It's wrong when it occurs in the United States, and it's wrong when it occurs in Ireland. And in California, we didn't put it up to a vote. The anti-gay forces took, in my view, improperly, the ruling that had been handed down by the Supreme Court of California, finding that the Constitution prohibited the denial of marriage and that civil partnership, or as we called it there, domestic partnership, was not good enough. The court made that ruling in the clear, cool, dispassionate light of courtroom based on evidence, and the anti-gay forces were able to funnel tens of millions of dollars into a political campaign to take it away from the court, put it on the ballot, and change the Constitution of California so as to undo this court ruling, and that now is being challenged in federal court. We won at the lower court level. It's now on appeal to the intermediate court. In my view, none of that should have happened because they shouldn't have been able to vote in the first place. Our freedom of speech, our freedom of religion, our freedom of the press, and our freedom to marry should not be put up to a vote. As your ad put it, you shouldn't have to go around asking for Sinead's hand in marriage to everyone in Ireland. It's not up to them. It should be up to the law and equal respect for equal couples. Nevertheless, we operate on the political terrain we operate, and if it's found that you have to take it to a ballot, then that's the way you have to proceed in order to secure the full protection and respect that your families need. And as far as the hatred and the prejudice and the discomfort that's out there, number one, I think you've done a terrific job so far. Marriage equality's public education campaigns, people's personal engagement with their neighbors and families, Glenn's work in having a conversation about the vulnerabilities and needs of families in the political circles. All of that has contributed to eroding and challenging the stereotypes and prejudices and discomfort. And you now have, I forget the exact number, but 70%-ish of the Irish people supporting the freedom to marry. At the same time, that's 70%, it leaves 30%. Those 30% will be heard. There obviously are powerful forces that oppose equality for gay people, as they oppose equality for women, as they oppose equality in choice in important personal areas of life, whether it be divorce or contraception or reproductive freedom. We have them in the United States, you have them here. They're there, they're going to be heard. We're not the ones who are elevating or exposing their hatred or discomfort or prejudice. It's there. Mm-hmm. We're simply the ones who are deciding whether we're going to let that set the law or whether we're going to challenge the law in a way that sends a message that moves the society forward, that engages young people and gives them a message of hope. Do we leave the anti-gay barriers and discrimination and inequality that are the product of hate and prejudice in place? Or do we work to challenge and dispel and change?
Okay. So we've been talking about marriage, obviously, for the last while. Apart from marriage equality, what are the other issues you think that should be on the table for lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans people?
In general?
In general.
In general. Well, we are the same as any other people. Our lives cannot be carved into one thing. It's not like we should be forced to choose which is more important to us, our job or our marriage, our children or our partner. We should have it all. And so I think wherever there's inequality or exclusion in the law, or wherever there's isolation or prejudice in the culture, in the society, we need to work on that. And that's why we have organizations that are, in some sense, more institutions that go on for a long time and that serve the community to deal with people's, the impact of prejudice, the impact of isolation, the abandonment by their families in some cases and so on. We need to have those safety nets and those protections and those support and those pathways forward for people, and we need to make sure they're robust and they're funded and they survive even in tough economic times. At the same time, one of the main contributions we can make in sending a message of hope and support to people is by making sure the government is on the side of equality, not on the side of prejudice. And one way to do that, one crucial way to do that, is to challenge discrimination in the law. Discrimination and prejudice are terrible. They're not going to be cured by any one action. They're not going to be changed overnight. It's an ongoing struggle, and we all know that not only from our own lives, but from the history of people who have also had to fight against discrimination and denial, whether it be racial minorities or ethnic minorities or religious minorities or women. Those battles are continuous. They're never going to be solved by one thing. At the same time, you can change things. You can make things a lot better. And one of the worst forms of discrimination is discrimination by the government itself. Government discrimination in the name of the people against the people. And as gay people, unlike some of the other groups that I've talked about that have had their long and painful struggles and still have work to do, as gay people, we are still the target of direct state-sponsored discrimination, even in free and generally progressive societies such as the United States and Ireland. And we have to tear that down. We cannot allow that to endure. Once those discriminatory weapons of the government are removed and the government is put on the side of equality and inclusion, there will still be plenty of work to do in the culture, in the society, in the need for safety nets. That will continue. The law will not automatically fix all of that. But the law should be on the right side, not on the wrong side.
Do you think there's a danger of a misconception that marriage is the end of our fight and that we've...
I think some people may have that misconception, just as some people look to find an excuse in anything to keep them from having to do the work, So I think there are people who will say this or that, but I think most people understand that we all have a lot of work to do to make the world we want it to be, and no one thing, however big, is going to finish the job, but this is a job we can finish. And that's the difference. We really have an opportunity to do something very important, very big, and when Ireland does it, it will make a big difference in the worldwide struggle. You are an inspiration, and you're a beachhead, and you're at the forefront. And we in the United States like to pride ourselves as leaders in human rights, but right now we are lagging, and so we need your help to get this done here, not only for the families here, but because you're going to help tug the rest of the world forward. When we started this work in the United States, there were 0 states that provided any measure of protection for same-sex couples, their children, any acknowledgement of our existence at any level, zero. And there were 0 countries where gay people could get married. In just about a decade, we now have 5 states and the District of Columbia, and now this majority and the foundation for the next wave of advances in the United States. And we now have 12 countries on 4 continents where gay people can marry, and several others, like Ireland, that are putting in place the building blocks and are on the road. It's the countries like Ireland, it's the countries like the United States who have to lift it up so that we can get the rest of the world where it needs to be. And that's what we're doing in our generation. We're lucky. We're the ones who get to see it happen.
Okay, so when you've seen it happen, I'm going to open to the floor in a minute, but when you've seen it happen and across America, marriage equality is introduced in every state of America, will you continue with activism or will you retire?
Well, now that you've told everyone how old I am. No, I think there's plenty more to be done. It wouldn't necessarily have to only be gay activism, because once we've eliminated direct state-sponsored discrimination against gay people, there are many, many things that could be better. And one of the things that, this is just me, but I love to travel. I love to be in other countries. I love to see the relative good fortune we in countries like Ireland and the United States have, and how much more needs to be done in other places. I served for 2 years in the Peace Corps in West Africa. So I don't know that I necessarily would keep doing the same activism, but it feels good to make the world better.